Hello, everybody. Welcome to the very first Okashicon Presents Make Your Monday, which is going to be a monthly presentation about, sorry, I've got some audio problems going on here. Give me a second here. I have got to quiet myself. There we go. Sorry. Oh, no. Still got audio problems. There we go. Okay. Woo. Welcome back again. Welcome to Okashicon Presents Make Your Monday, a monthly presentation about Japanese crafts, cosplay, accessory making, and more. We are so glad that you have joined us today. Sorry for the small technical glitches there. I have got 5 windows running and a craft project going on my desk. So I'm a little bit old to be multitasking quite that much, but thank you so much. Please remember that you can be active in the chat this entire time. So for those of you who do not yet have a Twitch account, please log in to get a free account so you can comment it live in the chat. I will be responding to you guys throughout the evening. We're going to be trying to aim for about 90 minutes tonight, and we will have another ad break in the middle because Twitch does demand it. Sorry, but that is the price of our free service here. But let me tell you a little bit more about Okashicon Presents and some of our activities that we have. So every month we are trying to do usually about 4 different activities. We'll be starting some of them in September. Others we began in July. So the first Saturday of the month, starting in September, hopefully we'll be bringing back our anime afternoons, which is going to be a Saturday afternoon presentation. People will be talking about anime and cool things related to that. Probably have some artists and other things like we normally do. So normally that is a live in-person activity that we used to house over at Alamo Draft House, Barrel of Fun. But it's going to be online for the foreseeable future. Then on the second Sunday of the month at 8 p.m., we have Demo Disc, which is where our team of CW and Kendall play from the vaults some demonstration discs of video games. Last night was some rather original and entertaining demos of old PlayStation games from the 90s. The second Monday of the month, which is now, is going to be Make Your Monday. So hopefully not only will you be able to make things on a Monday, but this will make your Monday a little bit better. And then on the fourth Sunday of the month, you're back with me again for Japan Stories, where I'll be telling you cool things about Japan or products made in Japan or just anything about my travels or my experiences there. I do spend a couple months there every year under normal circumstances. This year I can't, so I'm just going to share with you a lot of things that I have done. Checking in with the chat for a moment. No one said anything yet, so do remember that I am keeping an eye on that. Tonight we are going to be talking about Kumihimo, which is Japanese braiding. Let me remind you that not everything that we're going to talk about over this series is going to be related to specifically Japanese crafts, but the things that we have coming up for 2020 are, and there's a reason for that. I have a game plan. Stick with me on this for a minute. So starting tonight, for the next couple of nights, I'll be showing you some techniques of the next 3 months that can help you make some small gifts. Then in November, we'll talk about some techniques that can help you make a card. And in December, we will have a way to wrap and present your presents. So if you follow along from now until December, you will be all ready for the winter gift giving holidays. So if that sounds great, please be sure to stick with us every month, starting now, second Monday of the month. Now, we do have a webpage on the Okashicon webpage. There's a section on the Okashicon webpage called Make Your Monday. Hopefully we can get the ticker going up there. That is where after each broadcast, you'll be able to find a link to the replay. There'll also be any of the resources that I've mentioned. So I often talk about links and YouTube channels that I like and other things like that, books, whatever it is that I'm discussing that month. We'll have those resources will go there along with the replay afterwards. And then the next month when we have the supply list, that'll also be on that page. So keep checking that page regularly. We'll be updating it, like I said, at least twice a month, one with the upcoming information supply list and one with the previous resources and links and other information that you may need. Replays will also be available on the Okashicon and my Kintsugi style YouTubes. But all you need to remember is Okashicon or me. You'll see me in the chat as Kintsugi style. I'm pointing over here because that's where my chat window is. But yeah, if you see Kintsugi style in the chat at any point in time, that is me. And I will, while we're on ad breaks, I'll be trying to type, but all the rest of the time, I'll just give you an audio response to whatever it is that you've been asking me. Going down my list, looks like we've got everything here. I'm also going to say that I usually, every show, I give you a video recommendation, YouTube recommendations, and a book recommendation. Right now, I'm just going to start with a video series recommendation, and that is one that I really enjoy, and it is the only show that I know of that has discussed Kumihimo in the past, and that is on NHK World. There's a show called Core Kyoto. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Tokyo Eye 2020, it's not quite the same thing. So although it is a show dedicated to the city of Kyoto, it is more about the traditional arts and crafts and cultural activities, food, and things like that. So it's less about sightseeing and more about historical traditions of Kyoto. And I know that Kyoto has done an entire episode on Kumihimo. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to some slides to give you a bit of background on what Kumihimo is. And then later we'll get into the actual live making aspects of it. So let me look at the slides here. So as you can see, this was the advertisement for today. Again, I'm sure because you guys are here, you have figured this all out, but we will always be at the same location and the same time every month. And next year, we'll be going into more cosplay and accessory making and other types of activities. But for now, they're all going to be Japanese-related arts and crafts for 2020. But today's main event is Kumihimo, the art of Japanese braiding. Now, where does Kumihimo come from? It comes from the word kumu, which is the verb form of like kumuru. So if you know anything about Japanese conjugation, that kumu becomes kumi or kumimasu if you were doing it in a polite form. If you don't know anything about Japanese pronunciation, you'd like to learn at home, go back and watch the replay of my Learning Japanese at Home, which was at Okashicon last month. But for the rest of you, I'll just say that kumu means braid and himo means cord. So literally the word kumihimo just means cord braiding. Now, you may think, well, what's the difference between cord and rope? Honestly, rope tends to be sturdier, made of things like jute or hemp. Hemp was very popular in Japan. It's been raised there for millennia. Whereas cord tends to be a little bit more decorative. They often serve the same function. So they're just twisted strands that have additional strength to them in some way so that they can be pulled tighter, they can hold things together, they can tie things together. So in the traditional sense of Kumihimo, these cords were usually made with silk. And they were actually the very first documented use of it, as you can see from the photo there, is from holding together armor. Literally, the pieces of armor would be, stiff individual sections, usually made of bamboo, sometimes made of metal, and then they would be laced together. So there's a lot more flexibility to them. Although this is a stiff kind of armor, you want to think more in Western terms like chainmail as far as flexibility than, say, plate mail, which would be harder. But as you can see on this guy here, that there is a lot of the big cords holding his helmet on with the decorative tassels, but also all the red stuff on his shoulders. Those are also Kumihimo cords. Now, he's got a combination of flat and round braids, and that'll be important later. But this type of Kumihimo is documented back to the 7th century, where they actually didn't have any of the special frames or looms. They just would use their fingers. And in fact, in some cases, some of the patterns required 5 different people with 2 hands, and they had all these little interlocking techniques. That is not what I'm going to be teaching you because it's a little bit more complicated. The best I can do is finger knitting. But yeah, I would love to learn. It's a whole other different art form of Kumihimo, and that's the precursor to what we have now. Nowadays, you see Kumihimo mostly on obijime, which is the small thin cord that you see tied around an obi when people are wearing formal kimono. Also, if you have a haori, which is the jacket, there's a little tie closure on the front. That's usually made of kumihimo. And also if people are wearing netsuke. Now, netsuke is very collectible because they're tiny little sculptures. Those were actually a counterweight. And so the counterweight would be decorative on the belt to hold like your fan or your money pouch or other things there. But you will still see them sometimes attached to netsuke in the collector's market. So I will show you some of the obijime that I have collected after we finish with the slides. I'll get into my practical presentation. Now, traditional kumihimo, as I mentioned, comes in two main types. Now, these are very broad categories. There's infinite subcategories within these, but you have a round type and a flat type. So basically, like you think of as a cord, it's more or less circular. It may have something, a stuffing inside of it, or it may just be solid threads, but still it's tubular in some variety or other, or at least, cylindrical. There's also a flat style, which is more like a tape or a ribbon. These two were made on different devices. One is called a marodai and the other is called a takadai. I will show you photos in a moment. And they were usually made of many strands of silk threads, just reeled silk, not spun, just very fine silk threads held together, not twisted and not spun in any way, but just, about 20 in a bunch to make up one quote unquote thread. Nowadays, we use a spun fiber of some sort, a yarn or a floss or something that is going to hold together a little bit more. But the true masters, they're just working with bundles of fiber, and each bundle becomes like a thread or a packet. And another point I would like to make is that these traditional patterns are still being made by very, very few traditional masters. They're still operational and still keeping the craft alive, particularly in the Kansai region. However, these patterns are kept very secret. You do not get to know the patterns unless they have been stolen. So if you find a book that is claiming to have very traditional, authentic, historical Japanese kumihimo patterns, either they're lying or they have literally stolen pattern books from someone else. And I would not buy that book. I would not support that because it is something that you have to earn the right to even look at these patterns. And if they're just being published in the West, that is quite a violation of the trust between master and apprentice. Unless you have an entire family that has maybe died out and there are no survivors left. But I've never seen that. I've only seen books that claim to have traditional patterns, but really they were just looking at extant historical cords and then recreating them in some way. They weren't actually the traditional patterns. But that's just something to bear in mind when we get into modern kumihimo. So this is the marodai that I mentioned. I do not own one of these because they're about $200, and then each one of those little bobbins or taka is an additional cost. So I would love to own one, but I don't currently have the sort of $250 to invest to get started. But you'll notice this is just basically like a round donut with weighted bobbins hanging off the sides. And then there's also a weight in the center that pulls the cord down. And then you're just moving. You're just flipping these cords. If you've ever watched people making lace with the little flipping bobbins where they're just, rotating one over another, it's very similar. There's no interlocking system. Hi, Reina Darkova. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. There's another 9 or 10 of you out there, so I hope that you guys feel free to go ahead and join us in the chat, make any comments that you would like to, and I will be keeping an eye on things. And I just lost my slides. There we go. So again, this is a woman who is working with a marodai. Yes, you can have it made, Missy Ibiki. In fact, there are people who are now making them out of plexiglass. I have seen them. I'm sure that it's only a matter of time before, there's also people who make them out of wood. If you had people who are keen woodworkers, they're not very complicated. The bobbins or the taka are more complicated because they have to have a similar weight to all of them, otherwise the tension gets off. But the stand itself is not really that complicated, but to make it out of hardwood, I've usually seen them, the least expensive I've seen is about $80, but then each individual bobbin, and you usually need to start with at least 12, is, $5 or $6 a piece. So that's just a matter of, if you've got really good quality wood, it's going to cost you because these are all hand turned on a lathe, no matter how you're making them. But that is the Mara dye that is used for making round braids. I can tell you of a couple places in Tokyo where you can learn to make Kumihimo on a Mara dye. Unfortunately, though, you have to make reservations months in advance, which I did not do, and so I did not actually get to. I didn't get to take this class because I didn't book several months out. But there is a store that has been around since the 17th century that has been making Kumihimo in Asakusa that entire time, and now you can do like a little basic 1-hour class, make your own keychain kind of thing. This is another view of the Mara dye, so you can see where the cord is hanging down in the center. There's actually a weight that's under there. There's a weighted rock that is putting some tension on that cord. Nowadays, there's a lot of different options that you can use for weighting, but tension is very important in Kumihimo. You've got to keep the tension on the threads as they're outside of the Mara dye or the disc, and you've got to hold the tension on the inside, and that's really the magic that makes this happen. When we start looking at modern forms of Kumihimo, when we start doing it ourselves, we'll notice that it's a bit of a struggle, and that's because our cheap modern, or even just made out of cardboard tools are not going to do half the work for you, whereas a Mara dye is really going to do a lot of the work for you. The photo on the top is just some of the bobbins, or taka, as I've said. And then the photo on the bottom right is just a sample of someone's cord that they've made. There are a lot of suppliers that make kits. And in fact, this was just taken off one of their websites because I was looking for things that I could use without violating copyright. And so that was one they'd given permission for. But you can see basically that it is a completely round cord in some variety or other, and you can see from the one on the Mara dye that there's some really interesting patterns. The spiral kind of goes one way and then stops and goes the other direction. There are, again, infinite patterns that you can make with these. But this is the taka dye. Now, the flat ones are made in something that looks like an enormous weaving loom. And I definitely do not have one of these because these are in the thousands of dollars. Even if someone was to hand make it, it's several $100s because of the wood and the fine details of the spacing, things like that. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into making this. And this is the smallest one I've ever seen, by the way. Usually they are 2 or 3 times this size. They're huge. You can also see, if you look at the very top of it, they're creating an entire wide belt piece. That's probably 4 or 5 inches wide, that piece, and probably at least 100 different bundles of thread going into that. So if you ever made friendship bracelets when you were younger, it's the same type. The friendship bracelet creation was a very similar process, except they're tying knots into it, and this is all literally braiding, so there are no knots. If you've done it correctly, I seem to get knots in it a lot. Again, I'm blaming the tools on this one because, we can always blame our tools, right? But anyway, this is what the flat version, so more the Kyoto style is going to be the flat braids. And when I show you the obijime that I have, the ones that I've purchased are going to be in the flat style. But those are the traditional forms of making. However, modern Kumihimo came over to the West in the early 2000s. That's not to say it was the beginning of when it was here, but that's certainly when some of the major bead supply companies started making the foam discs and coming out with the books and the kits and specific products for learning to do Kumihimo as a Westerner without having to go to Japan to study it. The people who were teaching it before then, usually people with sort of like the Braid Society, which is an international organization. There's also the Luciding Society in the UK, which, although Lucid is a different tool entirely, it creates a similar product. So I know that some of the members of the Lucid Society UK did teach Kumihimo, and that's where I was exposed to it in the late 90s. But we didn't have any of the tools, the sort of modern foam tools that I'll show you shortly. That came out just under 20 years ago. At that time, before then, people were just making out of cardboard. I've also seen people making it out of paper plates, the small sort of salad size, the thicker ones. I don't know if it's like Chinette or whatever it is, the one that's a bit sturdier. Those actually, you can make pretty good Kumihimo discs out of that. But, we have created alternatives to the Mara dye and the taka dye to make it much more easy, much more affordable, and much more portable, but not necessarily easier. I will say, because you've got tension issues when you don't have the weight of all the wood. Also today, instead of silk, we're using yarn, nylon, embroidery floss, and pretty much anything you can come up with that is in a yarn shop or a needlepoint shop. You can use it and it works perfectly well. It's going to give you a different finish. It's not going to have the sheen, or it's not going to have the softness. But if you're making it for jewelry or for like home decor, things like that, use whatever materials you have on hand, and definitely practice with whatever you have that is cheap. I'll show you some of my samples soon, and these are the yarns that have been donated to me, and this is a good way to put them into use because I maybe wouldn't use them another way. So feel free when you're doing this tonight, when you are working with things, use whatever yarn you have on hand until you practice and get the hang of it. We now have plastic bobbins instead of wooden ones, and then usually there's some kind of weight that goes in the middle, whether it's a hook, or I know a lot of people just have sort of like, again, a rock and a bulldog clip or something like that. You can also just pull it with your hand to add tension as well. In fact, sometimes you really need a combination of a weight and manual tension on it. Cords nowadays are not really used as part of everyday dressing. We're not wearing a lot of obejime. We're not carrying around netsuke. We're wearing haori. So a lot of times these cords are used in the way any other type of decorative cord is. So like upholstery cording and piping. And that's one of the ways that I will recommend that, if you've made certain cords that may fit with some of the projects that we're doing in the future. If you're doing in the similar colorway, you can use it to make a small pin cushion or a small, like a Christmas tree ornament. And then you can use a Kumihimo braided cord as trim around the outside edge. Also, jewelry is very popular. Bracelets, necklaces, keychains, as you can see in the photo there. These are just used as little accents throughout, normal accessories. And there are very similar things. So if you pick up a piece, you're not quite sure what it is, it may actually be something like spool knitting, finger knitting, bead crochet often looks very similar to beaded kumihimo. So, honestly, if you are already very comfortable with spool knitting or Viking knitting or bead crochet and you're getting the results that you're happy with, you don't want to learn another technique, that's fine. But if you've also like, I've always wanted to make that kind of beaded cord, but I don't know how to crochet, or I don't want to work with tiny little crochet hooks, then maybe learning the beaded kumihimo version instead is going to give you a similar result, but it may be the process you find much more effective. I'm going to give you some recommended resources here, and then again, like I said, these will be up on the website afterwards on the Make Your Monday website page on the Okashicon website. I'll just quickly tell you now, first off, I will say that there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of websites, so I can't really list all of them. The first one that I'm going to say, the Rosalie Nelson page, this is a woman who did train in Japan in the 1980s, back before anyone in the West was really learning or teaching kumihimo. She's a member of the Braid Society, and she just has a really pretty page about the history of kumihimo and a lot of the things that she's created. So it's just a very lovely introduction to the craft of kumihimo. Interweave Press, those of you who are very familiar with arts and crafts are probably familiar with Interweave Press. They've been bought out and reshuffled, and they're having some issues now, but they do still have an Origin of Kumihimo website up that, again, gives you some of the basics, more or less the same things that we've gone over, but with a lot more interesting photos. The third link there is really cool, actually. So I didn't realize that Google has these arts and culture exhibits. I've seen it on one of their, I think it's like Google Earth app, but I'd never found it on their webpage before. And this is about the very origins of kumihimo. So when we're talking about how it goes back to the 7th century and people were using their fingers instead of any type of loom, they have some videos of people doing that as part of this website. And next, I'm just going to say Pinterest. I'm going to say go to Pinterest and type in the word kumihimo, and you will get hundreds of thousands of different patterns. In fact, one of the reasons why I'm not really going to recommend any particular book about kumihimo is because there are far more patterns on the internet. Once you learn how to read a kumihimo pattern, which is quite simple, you're really not going to need a book about it. I mean, I do own two, but I they're all very similar. I can't really recommend one over the other, but Pinterest is where I go when I'm looking for something. If I want a spiraling Kumihimo, if I want a flat Kumihimo, if I want to do a 4-strand, I'll type in 4-strand Kumihimo into the search box. If I want to do a 24-strand, and anything like that, I usually Pinterest is my first stop to look for things. There are 2 YouTube channels I'd recommend. Both of these are by manufacturers of supplies and kits. Both of these companies make some of the foam discs, and then they also have tutorials for how to use those. Beataholic also, I recommend some of their kits if you want to purchase all-in-one packages where it's got the cording and the fixtures, like the clasp on the end and the beading and everything else. You can buy a really inexpensive kit to get you started, and that therefore they also have tutorials on their YouTube. So those are 2 places I would start. You don't have to use their tools in order to follow along with their tutorials, because a lot of this Kumihimo discs and things are very interchangeable across brands. Recommended retailers. These are just supply companies that I like. Again, I've already mentioned Beataholic for their kits. These are just the products that I have used. I'm not going to say that if it's not on this list, it's bad. That absolutely would be incorrect. These are just the ones that I've used and I can personally recommend. Also, I didn't put this on the list, but Daiso, come to Austin soon. And for some reason, I bought a lot of Kumihimo supplies and cannot find them in my house. So a lot of the samples that I've been making to show you tonight were made on the Daiso version of it. So hopefully when Daiso's open soon in the autumn, you'll just be able to go pick it up for about $1.50 and get a disc and a weight all together in one. But in the meantime, feel free to, check out these particular companies. The Woolery is the one that has the great Maradai that starts at about $100 and goes up. And I definitely do not have the budget for that yet. But maybe in the future, certainly I can imagine if I go take a class in Tokyo and I use an actual Maradai, I'm going to want it. But right now I have a friend who has one. I'd wanted to borrow it for this class, but because of COVID, I'm not seeing outsiders anymore. So, well, I've not been seeing outsiders for a long time. I've lost track of days now. But these are just some, again, recommended companies, but all companies are going to be more or less fine. Whatever works. This is what's coming up. We're going to actually go back to my other camera. So pardon me for a moment while we swap. So hopefully you will now be seeing, there we go. So welcome to the very first time that we run the dual camera on Okashicon Presents. So if there are any issues with this, please nag me about it. I will try to fix it. In the meantime, we're going to start getting ready to start our actual crafting. I'm going to go ahead and have a look over on the chat. Okay, so it's mostly Melissa commenting on things. That's fine. I'll ignore you. So I'm just going to show you this particular book only because this is the only physical copy book I have for Kumihimo. The other ones I have are ebook format. You will also probably notice that my camera does sometimes go out of focus. There's nothing I can do about that at the moment. I do have a donation link that'll come up later in my slides if you would like to donate towards getting me a better web camera. So that won't happen in the future. But in the meantime, just please bear with it. It'll eventually refocus. I'm just going to flip through here quite briefly, show you some examples. This is one made out of all kinds of fluffy yarn using the exact same techniques. But any Kumihimo book that you find is going to have this layout, which is basically the little discs. You may have seen this one actually, it looks like it comes with a CD. No, that's actually just a little cardboard disc, and they'll have little numbers on them. So you're going to find your pattern. It's going to tell you the setup and where you put the different strands. And then it's going to tell you how you move the strands around. And that is all that you need out of a Kumihimo book. Every single page has got a different pattern, different texture that gets created. Sometimes it'll even show you some color combinations. It's going to show you when you move this to there and move that to there. Again, I really cannot suggest that you need a book in particular. But you see that this is even, although this is technically a round cord, it is got this very pronounced spiral going around the outside of it. And that is definitely something that you can do. That requires a little bit more practice on the tension. But that's the book. let me show you some of these samples, some of them that I have made for you, some of them that I have purchased. So I'll get this book out of the way, go back to my trusty Ofa nut. Those of you who were with us for the Japan stories about 2 weeks ago, you'll remember my trip to Ofa. That was last year. Here's all the samples that I have up. These two, the fancy ones, are the ones that I did not make, right? I bought these at a flea market. Let me see if you can see that. This has silver in it, woven into the inside. These are a flat style cord. You can see how they're quite chunky, but generally speaking, this is a rectangular cord. This one, even more sparkly, that you're not going to be able to see the texture under my bright lights. By the way, if you're going to a flea market, you can pick these up for $2 or $3 a piece. Absolutely. Which is an absolute shame because there's a lot of work that goes into them. These are all handmade. These cannot be. This one can be made by a machine, probably was made by a machine. This one could not be. And again, I think I maybe paid $5 for this. It goes really well with an obi that I have for my yukata. This is a round cord. This is not one that I made, but it was one that was a gift. You can again see that there's a bit of a metallic sparkle to the yarn. That's not necessary, but it does make it a really nice accessory. This one just has a pendant attached to it. This is a fused glass pendant. And while I did not make either part of this, I do know both how to do the Kumihimo braiding and I do know how to fuse glass, although I got this pendant before I started fusing glass and it's been quite an inspiration for me. So those are some of the more commercial, more professional versions of it. Let me show you some of the ones that I've made over the last 2 days, just so that you can get another idea. I did make these in kind of garish colors, just so that it shows up a bit better on camera. These are not made out of any kind of fancy yarn. They are made out of dishcloth cotton. There, I think they let the camera finish adjusting. This is a round 7-strand braid. This is exactly what we will be making later today. This is a 4-strand braid. It's not actually that much smaller because this is more densely packed. So tension makes a big difference in how it's going to be created. Also, this is completely solid. You know, you can twist this, it does not come apart. Whereas this one is actually just 2 sets of cords twisted around each other. Let me see if I can get this to open up. Here we go. You see how that opened up? It's just 2 sets. They've been twisted around each other, and then the tension just causes it to wrap around. This is actually a really, really simple braid. It probably looks more impressive if you did it all 4 strands in one color. But I did it 2 and 2 just to make it a little bit more obvious how the pattern turns out. This is also a 4-strand braid and a chevron. This thing, I wish I could say that it was easy. The pattern itself is fairly easy, but the tension is terrible. And the reason I kept this one to show you is, I don't know how well you can tell here. You see how this is tiny and very, very tight and lumpy and bumpy. That's because I was still getting my tension figured out. This one was quite difficult to really figure out exactly what you're doing. And the moment you cross something the wrong way, you get a big bulky knot here. I can whip out this particular braid in my sleep, but anytime I do a new to me pattern, it does take a lot of practice. So one of the things that people often ask is, how do I know how long my threads need to be before I start braiding in order to get a finished length that I'm aiming for? Say I want a necklace that's a certain length, finished length. And the answer to that is, if you're a knitter or a crocheter, you're going to hate this, but you just have to do samples and testing. Every single yarn is going to be slightly different, how it takes up and how it shrinks up as you're working it. And as you can see, there's obviously a difference between if I'm using a tight tension versus if I'm using a loose tension, how long it's going to wind up to be. So you really need to practice, get the hang of the pattern, and then practice again with the materials that you want. And then you can sort of back figure. So in this case, I measured out how long the threads were before I started braiding and then measured, and I calculated the shrinkage rate. This one did not shrink very much at all because they're literally just twisted, in which case you could probably just do 1.5 times the length of your finished desired length. But this one definitely had a lot more take up to it. So although I started out with nearly the same amount of yarn for these two, you can see one is substantially longer than the other. So there is no magic number that I can tell you as far as how, how to measure in advance. So I gave you a supply list that is just a practice amount because I find that those lengths are comfortable to work with. Now let me show you a couple other tools before I get into the cheap, extra budget-friendly version of it. These are 2 foam discs. These are a squishy foam. I don't know if you can see how flexible that is. The prime benefit to these is that, let me see if I can put it back down where the camera will focus on it, is that when you have a piece of yarn, let me see if I can just get a random piece of yarn here somewhere. You have a piece of yarn, it will stay put when you pull it into, well, that's too bright for you to see, but that's going to stay put. If I've got it here, that yarn is going to stay there. I can wiggle it around. It's not going to fall out on me. So I have a slot. It's going to bounce back. I have too much light, but I hope you can get an idea of how the main benefit of using a foam is just going to be that it keeps the tension fairly solidly in whatever slot you put these things in. Remember, a Maridai does not have any slots at all. It doesn't have the numbers marked. You've got to visually remember, imagine you're looking at a clock. Remember where the positions are on the clock face, that type of thing. Whereas we Westerners, we're maybe a little bit slow in the uptake. I know I am. So it helps to have numbers, in some cases numbers and letters. This one is the one from Daiso. So I had this and the weight together. It was $1 in Japan, well, 100 yen in Japan. It's about $1.50 when you come to the United States, plus tax. This one has this little plastic thing here, which kind of helps the center bit wear out less, and it doesn't create as much friction on your yarn. But I find if you're holding it, that actually kind of hurts your fingers. So a bit of pros and cons as to whether you want something that has this internal plastic section or not. I have discovered I don't really care for it, but you may have a different experience. There's not going to be a lot of friction on these. But you may think, oh, I guess the round ones are for making round braids and the square ones are making flat braids. That's kind of true and kind of not true. In fact, you can make flat braids on a round one and round braids on a square one. It's just that if you have a square one, sometimes it helps the tension stay just a little bit more spread out. You can keep tension on the sides a little better. If you're a weaver, you'll know what I mean by a selvage, that's the sides here. That's one of the hardest things to learn in weaving, is to keep your sides completely even. So basically having a square loom like this can help keep your width consistent across the distance, but it's not necessary at all. You may remember from the book that I was showing you, there were definitely plenty of flat braids that they were making on the round disc. And obviously I have made a couple of the I made this particular round braid on this square disc. So although you want to think of this as the substitute Maridai and the substitute Takadai, they really don't work that way. Let me see if there's any questions. Okay, thank you that you can see it. Let me show you what the bobbins are like. So you remember that there were the really big, chunky wooden bobbins that help hold the fibers down for you. We don't have those in the United States, because if you're holding something wooden on a little disc, that is going to just, tip the balance over and you wouldn't really be able to put it down. So we have little plastic bobbins. These just open up. Again, let me get my loose end of thread here, demonstrate what it would be like. If you've ever hand wound a bobbin for a sewing machine, it works exactly the same way. You're just going to take it and wind like this. And then in this case, you just close it down, and that keeps a very steady, light amount of tension. So it's hanging over the edge. and it's got a certain amount of weight to it. Kumihimo is all about the tension. If tension gives you a headache, you're gonna not like this terribly much. I know certain patterns are much easier and certain patterns are much more sensitive, and that's just something you have to experiment with. Everyone's gonna have their own sense of tension. And I know some people who they're used to using a Mara die, they can't get used to using a foam disc because of the extra, it does pull a lot more. You can put too much tension on it using a foam disc, which is not true of a Mara die. But again, it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of experimentation, and just be patient with yourself. This is a skill that you're learning. It is not a project that you're going to have a finished result in a matter of minutes. It does require experience and practice, and I know those are two things I'm not a big fan of. One thing that is really nice about these plastic bobbins, these are, I believe, by Beadsmith. One of the companies that I mentioned, they do snap together, which if you're stopping in the middle of a project, so here's a project that I started earlier with all these dangling threads. If you're like me and you have a cat, it's really nice to kind of wrap all your threads up and then lock it together so you can throw this in your bag, come back to it later, and you don't have a huge mess, a tangled mess of threads. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any questions right now. Okay, let me just show you some other alternatives of things that you can use. So if you don't want to use bobbins, you can get small clips. Again, now if you're like me and you made friendship bracelets, you would just take it, make a little loop, and then you could clip it together. These are just beading clips. There's nothing special about them. You can use bulldog clips. I actually, when I was making friendship bracelets, I used to use bobby pins a lot. I would just wrap the yarn around the bobby pin and then hold it firm like that. It works the same way. You have to unwind it a little bit more often. So these are inexpensive and they're nice, and I really would recommend these if you have a couple dollars. I think the pack of 8 was maybe $4 when I got it. But if you really don't want to invest anything whatsoever, but you find that you do need some way to manage the threads, especially in between, like you're putting the project away. If you have bobby pins, hairpins in your house, it's great. So we do have a question from Raina Dark Nova. Sounds like a lot of experimentation. Did it take you a long time to get used to the tension, or it depends on the pattern used? Yes, it is a lot of experimentation. I try to do every pattern at least twice to where I'm comfortable with it in what I call waste yarn. Yarn that's been donated to me, or yarn that maybe I have leftovers of. I'll do that twice just to get used to the pattern itself. And then I'll do it once in my finished yarn to try to figure out, I will do it much, much larger than what I think it needs to be, because I can always cut it down. So if I want to do a bracelet and I wind up with, an extra long piece, that's fine. You can always cut it down smaller. So yeah, I'll do it twice in waste yarn, then I'll do it once extra large in my finished yarn. And then if I want to do multiples of it, I'll have a better idea of the size. However, it does completely depend on the pattern used. That practice has to go back in every single time you switch. So like this one, this is one that I started. So I actually, you may have seen, I think we ran on our channel at some point. Maybe we didn't. Maybe I completely forgot to have this broadcast. But back in April, I did an introduction to Japanese fiber arts on the Austin Oita Sister City Committee's YouTube and Facebook. So this was just a super basic sample. This was the sample that I did on cardboard. This is what we'll be doing today. But you can see the tension on that. I don't know if it's going to focus. The tension on that is quite even. It's really not lumpy, super quick, and on the most basic, just a piece of cardboard. So I can whip these out easily, practically blindfolded. Then I went to this one. As you can see, this was the second one I tried, and I screwed up, and I screwed up, and I screwed up, and I screwed up. I did pretty well, got down to the end, started messing up my tension again. So even once you get 1 or 2 patterns that you can do in your sleep, you're still gonna have to practice every single time you start a new pattern. I don't know why I keep picking this up to represent pattern. I don't know. I'll just show you a couple other options of materials that you can use for instead of yarn. So obviously this, what I was using these for, is just ye old dishcloth cotton. It's not my colors, not my thing. I think these are on sale for 50 cents. And my parents love handmade dishcloths, so I just buy whatever color there is. And then when I don't feel like making the dishcloths, I just grab a couple yards and practice with it. But most of your patterns will call for satin cord or what they call rat tail. This is a beadsmith package. This is specifically a Kumihimo kit. You'll see it's a Kumihimo mixed color rat tail. I do not know why it's called rat tail. I mean, rats have lovely tails, but they're not shiny and satiny, so I don't understand. But this is, I think it's 4 pieces of 3 yards long each, and it says it makes an 18-inch finished braid. So you'll notice, but I don't know how many, I don't know, oh, and there's a pattern on the back as well. I don't know if you can see that. You probably can't because it's a bit too bright. There is a recommended pattern for using it, but they usually recommend a 2mm rat tail cord is what the standard book suggestion is going to be. You absolutely do not have to use this. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It creates a beautiful silky, it's kind of the closest thing to a traditional silk bundle. But you know, there's no reason why you have to go straight to this until you've practiced a lot. And in fact, this is the one that I actually wear, is actually quite stiff. It's nylon. It's actually probably more like this, which I'll show you. This is beadalon. This is a macrame cord, but it comes in wonderful colors. And so I often use this. The only thing that I would suggest that you bear in mind, look, here's another macrame cord. This one's in black. You're not going to be able to tell anything on there, but it's the same. It's a little bit thicker. If you have a pattern that is for a 2mm cord and it says a certain length to it, that's going to change if your thread diameter changes. So you can't necessarily go by what the pattern says for length. Again, you have to, as we call it in knitting crocheting, gauge swatch it. You have to do samples and tests. But again, you're also not going to get this thickness that you would. This is approximately the same diameter of thread. You're not going to get this thickness in this tiny macrame thread. So again, I started doing this cord sample in this tiny nylon cord, and it was so tiny and minuscule you would not have been able to see it on the camera. So that's when I stopped and went back to worsted weight yarn. But just bear that in mind. Every time you change the materials, it is going to slightly change your end result, which is again why you need to sample and swatch before you do any of that. Do we have any questions with that so far before I start getting into how to start this 7-strand braid on cardboard? Any questions? Okay, let me just start clearing things away right now. If you had your supplies with you, if you have a square of cardboard, some scissors, and 7 strands of yarn, or 4 strands if you want to do a different one later, but 7 strands for now, please get all that ready. I have my strands here. I'm going to cheat. This is the weight that came with the Daiso cord. Sorry, the Daiso disc. I'm not going to teach you to start with a weight, but because I'm trying to, you know, do different things, watch the comments and things all at once, I am going to cheat because this makes it a little bit easier for me to only use 2 hands instead of 3 while I'm trying to do everything. But I have my links of yarn. Again, this is just plain cotton dishcloth yarn. This is the same yarn that I used for this, except this time I mixed in a lot more solid turquoise, and this time it's just the variegated yarn by itself. But this is roughly what we're going to create. So I've got my yarn, and now I need to get out my scissors. Remember, this is going to be your cardboard scissors, not your fabric scissors, not your good scissors. We're going to have a banner run across here in a minute. Never use your fabric scissors on anything else, ever, because my mother has still not forgiven me, and it's been a good 30 years. My mother was a home ec teacher, so you can kind of understand why. But you've got your cardboard. Now, if you have a foam disc and you're like, why can't I use the foam disc? Of course you can, obviously. go grab a foam disc instead. It's perfectly fine. But this is if you don't have it and you have no idea and you don't want to spend any money on here and you get a certain company that mails you boxes all the time. Yeah, for free. Yeah, clearly I'm not spending any money from them. Yeah, I'm just getting empty boxes, right? Okay, sometimes you do get nearly empty boxes. It's embarrassing. But you've got your square of cardboard. You've got your scissors and you've got your yarn. You are ready to start your first Kumihimo project. Now, I did say scissors. You can obviously use your trusty utility blade and your cutting mat. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Feel free if that's what you like. In fact, I often find that it's easier to cut the center hole with the utility blade. This is the kitty blade that I showed you with response to OFA. This is their new child-friendly safety blade. Definitely recommend that one if you're klutzy like I am. But let's just do this the old-fashioned difficult way. Let's stab the scissors through the center of the cardboard here. Let's get nice and dangerous. I'm going to actually try to do this so that you can see. Hopefully not stab myself here. You just want to start a hole. Poke a hole through here. Also, I should remind you the one disadvantage to using cardboard is that cardboard will kind of follow the bend of the corrugations. If you're really worried about that, take 2 layers of cardboard. Get one where the stripes are going this way, one where the stripes are going that way, glue them together, and then start this process. But if you're willing to just kind of wing it a little bit and understand that it may flop on you a little bit, that's fine. So you got your hole kind of started. Got to punch right the way through that ridiculous label on the other side because, boy, they do make it nice and secure. Okay, now I'm punched all the way through. You're just going to cut a small hole. The size of the hole doesn't really matter. About 1 inch square. It doesn't have to be square. It doesn't have to be round. It just needs to be a hole. Now, if you want to be really fancy, you would, you know, tape up the edges or something so that it doesn't fray on your yarn. But again, if you really want to be that fancy, just use a utility knife. I'm not going to bother. I've got a hole. It's ugly, but it does the job. Now, what we're doing is we're doing a 7-strand braid that has 8 slots in it. Right now we have 4 sides, so we just need to make this into an 8-sided octagon. Had to think of a word there. Almost said hexagon. Not correct. Octagon. What are you going to do? How do you create a square into an octagon? You clip some corners off. There is no correct angle, just a bit. You want to make sure that you leave plenty of space on the original side. I mean, if you want to be a perfectionist and draw it all out in advance, you can. I'm not gonna. I'm lazy. Just cut the corners off and boom. You don't have an octagon. Was that easy enough? Are you following me? Everybody with me so far? I see 6 of you. I see no one actually complaining, so I'm guessing you're understanding what I'm doing. Now you're going to take these scissors and you're going to cut a little slit, about 1/2 inch. The only thing that's super important is do not go all the way through. Absolutely. I did that one time. It was embarrassing. It was awful. And I was using like really thin cardboard, like from some food that I'd had in my freezer. Sturdier cardboard is going to work better, or multiple layers held together, and make sure you don't cut through because it's really hard to salvage if you do cut through. But yeah, you basically just want to make about a 1/2 inch slit, 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch slit in all of the sides. That's all there is to it. And then if we do another pattern later, if we have time, we actually need to go to a commercial break in about 3 minutes because unfortunately Twitch does require it. So first we're going to go ahead and let's see if I can say go ahead one more time. There we go. We have got 8 little slits cut into our cardboard. So hopefully you guys are with me now. You've got 8 pieces of yarn pre-cut. Remember, because you followed the supply list in advance. You are all my honor students today. Now it looks like I didn't pre-cut one because it looks like I did. There was no loop. That was an optical illusion. So you're going to pull your yarn up through the bottom if you've got a weight on the bottom. If not, don't worry about it. What you want to do, basically you got your yarn half in and half out, right? one side, going through here. Like it's that weird spinny toy I don't remember the name of. If you have a weight, you're just going to pop that weight in the end here. Let me undo this knot so that I can show you what you do. Again, if you're a knitter or crocheter, you will be familiar with the term half hitch. If not, just watch what I'm doing. It's an overhand knot. You're just going to do like this, wrap around your fingers. Hopefully you can see that. You're going to pull all this tails through. Now, if you have a loop with a hook on it, or you got a bulldog clip or something, go ahead and pop it in there. If you don't have a weight, don't worry about it. It's really not a problem. But yeah, you want to be able to undo this later. So you can go ahead and, make it a square knot. I don't bother. It's really no big deal. So if you guys are caught up right now, I'm just going to get you to the point where we're about to start, and then we're going to take a break. So you want to put this is where the tension starts to become a problem. So you need to make sure you're staying more or less equal distance, but you're going to put one thread in every little slot here. Y'all go ahead, get caught up with me. We are going to take a 3-minute ad break starting now. We'll be back in 3 minutes. So get to where you've got one yarn in 7 of the 8 slots. And in 3 minutes, we'll be back and we will show you how to start braiding after that. See y'all in 3 minutes. Welcome back to Okashicon presents Make Your Monday. We are finally getting started with actual Kumihimo braiding now. So hopefully you guys have gotten to this point. If anyone else needs a little bit extra time, let me know. But now is when you start fighting with the tension, pretty much immediately. You're going to want to keep an eye on this knot that you've made or the weight that you have on the bottom because you want to keep it more or less centered in your hole. Your hole may not be centered on the disc. Don't worry about that at all. But you want to make sure that you've got roughly the same amount of tension on all of these threads. That one looks a little bit tight to me. I'm going to redo it. Now, I have found this is one thing where, again, I've learned that I would really like the expensive Maridai, is that when you're pulling your threads in and out of either the cardboard disc or the foam disc, you're actually adding more tension on these threads than you would if you had a little bit of a weight and it just drapes over the edge. So that's why once you get the hang of this, you may want to switch from having loose threads like this, especially if you have a cat, to having the bobbin wound around them. Now, again, I didn't want you to have extra supplies, but once you have the bobbin, extra weight around there, you're not going to have to hold it in each slot like this. And I think you will find it easier that way. Certainly I do. But again, keep this more or less centered. Now I got to keep this centered on the camera. All you're going to do, you've got 7 strands and 1 hole. You're going to do the same thing every single time. You find the empty space, you go 1, 2, you find the third, pull that up, so you're going over 2. Turn it. You're always going to want to turn it the same direction, clockwise or counterclockwise, doesn't matter. You can go this way, you can go that way, but be consistent because otherwise that's where you're going to get knots and weird lumpy bumps. But again, I like to have this pretty much at my right-hand side. You can turn it, you can leave the space wherever you want. It really doesn't matter. But I always try to keep it consistent because then I just remember, okay, here's the empty space. 1, 2, pick up this one and down. Rotate. 1, 2. It's a third one. Empty space and pull. Now again, you're gonna notice as you're going along that this is going to want to shift inside the hole. So that's where you have to really keep paying attention. If you feel that it's pulled way over to one side, you just want to loosen this back up, whatever your last one was, hold it, and keep your hands holding onto it there. I'll show you in a minute on this one that does not have a weight, what it is that I do when there's no weight at all. You may find it easier to not have a weight. But again, if you've turned this around, you don't remember where you are, you're like, oh, I've been showing other things, the cat's been playing with it. Every so often you will need to just sort of comb through these loose threads. But you're like, okay, where am I? What am I doing? Well, again, you just find the empty slot, and that's where you start. 1, 2, back to the empty slot. It never matters with this pattern. That's why the 7-strand braid is so easy, and we teach it to children as young as 6 at Austin Fiber Artists. We actually take the Chinette plates, or the whatever those plates are, and just cut slits in a plate instead of cutting up cardboard. But it's a little bit easier to remember, I think, on a square piece of cardboard. Again, rotate, empty space, 1, 2, and that is it. That's the whole thing. You now know how to do the entire thing. I am going to, through the magic of television, here's one I started earlier. Remember, it's a slightly different color, same concept, a variegated thread. I don't need to know where I was. Remember that was face down? Don't need to know where I was. I just need to find the empty slot. You can tell my hexagon wasn't quite so artfully cut this time. Still works perfectly fine. There's my empty slot. 1, 2. Now in this case, I'm going to show you how important it is. You're going to want to keep hold of this cord here. Let me see if I can show you on the camera. I keep it pinched right here where it's just about to come up. You don't want to pinch it all the way through, but I'm holding tension that way. I'm holding tension by pinching it there. That's what your weight is going to do otherwise, but it's perfectly fine. That's probably, if you don't have a weight, you're going to want to hold the tension on the bottom. So again, I'm just pulling this up, moving it over to the empty slot, rotate. I'm letting go of the tension in my hand, rotating, getting that gap to where I want it, pinching again, pulling this strand out, And that's it. Let go, rotate, comb out the mess, pinch, 1, 2, 3, and that's it. That's absolutely it. You do the entire thing. You go until you run out of yarn. Do you guys have that? Have you figured it out? Any questions? Anyone lost? Is there anyone actually trying this and doing this live with me? Because I know, I'll be honest, if I'm ever watching one of these videos, I'm never doing it live with the presenter. I always watch and then go back and try it later and try to decide if I want. So please tell me if you are doing this live. I will be super impressed. You will get a gold star for the day. Okay, if not, I will go on and I will show you another alternative that you can do. That's all you do. Now, what I do to finish, let me show you some different finishing options. Usually, it's just tie a knot. So remember, this was the piece that was gifted to me. This was gifted the Hand Weavers Association. These were just 2 knots tied at the end. Nothing finished, nothing fancy whatsoever. A common way to finish it, oh, I had some other pieces that I was going to show you, is just to get these little magnetic clasps. These are sold specifically for Kumihimo. This is a Kumihimo kit that I got. These are from a company, I think I bought these in the UK when I was living in London about 10 years ago. But yeah, you would just take the ends. In this case, this would be a little bit too big for this size. I have some larger size magnetic clasps, but you know, you would pick the size that's about the end of your cord. You would get like a sewing thread and tie it off really tightly if you've got a bulky knot there, if you need something smaller. Then you would put some glue on the end. So you tie it down really, really tightly just before the end of that knot there. Then you can cut off the knot and not lose the tension, not have the braid unravel. Cut off the knot, put some glue on there, get it to hold in. Glue this piece into your magnetic clasp and do the same on the other end. When you're done, and you can have a necklace or a bracelet. If you've gone too far, maybe you've braided too much, obviously you can again just tie it off wherever your end point is. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but you know, you would just tie it off further back up. So say you've braided all that far, but you can just tie your knot, you know, get your sewing thread, get tape, get glue, get anything you like. Sorry, I didn't add on the supply list because obviously you can just use a knot. But you know, if you've gone too far, it doesn't matter. You can cut it back up, let this unravel a little bit, glue it, stick your finding on the end of it. It just has to be a tubular style finding. So it can't be like a jump ring or something like that. That's not going to hook in there. There's not going to be anything for it to attach to. Now, things that you can do with this. Obviously, if you have a big hole pendant, you can just put it right through the hole. I have a selection of other pendants. These are just some of my collection. I have some Muertos and some Pirates. This used to be a keychain. This actually it's really heavy. It makes a really nice weight, pattern weight instead. You can get these. You'll see that they have little bails or little hooks on there. That's when you can use this jump ring. Attach the jump ring to the little loop on top of your pendant. And then these are really big jump rings. You can slide them over your cord. Any questions about ways that you can use these cords? You can also, and one thing I will recommend, I don't have any way to show this to you, but you know, imagine you have a small pillow. You can just couch it around the edge like you would piping, a decorative additional piping on a small pincushion or something. We'll talk about that more next month when we're looking at sashiko and things that you can do with the embroidery. But you can definitely create cording that'll go with the sashiko, that'll go with the boro, etc., to connect all of these lessons together for the next few months. Any more questions about the 7-strand braid? I feel like I went over that really, really quickly, but I wanted to do that because then I can get to a different braid. I can go back to this one that I just started and pull it apart. See, I'm just pulling it all off, popping back out here. I could undo the bits that I'd braided. It's not really important because I'm just starting over again. I'm only going to pull 4 strands out now, out of the 7 strands, and I'm going to show you a 4-strand braid. Actually, I'm going to untie the knot. Now, this was the twisted braid that I showed you. So I'm going to pull this apart, take 3 strands away. Don't need you guys anymore. You're beautiful colors, but don't need you right now. Again, going to do this overhand knot, pop the weight in, or pop a bulldog clip on. Now, let's pull my scissors out again. If you have a regular foam disc, you can just use the foam disc for it. If you don't, go back to this. You see these 2, the flat sides, not the ones where we cut the corners off, but the flat sides. You just need to pick 2 of them. Braid. Yeah, you can do the braid for curtains. You can do like tie backs out of it. Tie backs are the bits that, you know, you've got your curtains hanging down. Sorry, let me see if I can fake some curtains for you. Here we go. Some fake little curtains right here, and the little bit that ties the curtains so that it hangs open. Those are called tie backs. I know, creative name. You can make tie backs out of these cords. Very common to use. You can make tassels, attach them on the end, that sort of thing. But anyway, let's go back to the 4-strand braid. You've got your octagon here. You're going to take just 2 of these sides. Doesn't matter which 2, they just need to be adjacent to each other. And you're going to add an extra slit, just about 1/4 of an inch away from the one on the left of the one that's already there. To the left doesn't really matter so much, but that's how I learned it. So you could actually, if you were making this totally from scratch, just make 2 things at the bottom. So you've now got, you know, this is 1 side, this is 2, this is 1, that's 2. Now I'm going to make the 4-strand braid. Go back to your 4 strands, pull them up through your middle. Again, you're going to pull pretty much down to the end, and you're going to put 1 strand in one side that has 1 slit, 1 strand in one side that has the 2 slits opposite, and you want it to be in the left-hand side there. And again, the same thing here. We're now 90-degree angle to that one. Whoops, shouldn't have put 2 in there. And then 1 there. Get this centered more or less on the tension. This is one where I found it was really, really helpful to wind the bobbins on here. So let me just show you how quickly I could wind a bobbin. I'm not going to do all 4 of them because y'all would get really bored, but this I found a lot easier to not bother with the slits because I didn't have to think so much about where everything was going. But yeah, 1 bobbin, wound, clipped on, and then I would leave it hanging about that distance off. But you've got your piece set up like this. Whoops. The slot that has, so the side that has 1 slot goes away from you. That's the top. The side that has 2 slots stays with you. In this case, you do not have to rotate the board at all. So it goes top down, bottom up, bottom over. And you go left, right, right, left, right, down. And that is 1 round. You keep doing that. That's it. You don't have to rotate at all. You're just going to keep, now here, this is what it looks like when you have a bobbin. You just pull the whole thing over like this. Eventually, if you have the bobbin, you'll see, I don't know if you can tell, that's staying just right on there. I don't have to keep putting it back down into the slot because the tension is holding it. That is how the Maridai works. That's why there's no slots in a Maridai, because the weight is enough to hold that. If I were to go ahead and put the bobbins on all 4, I would never need to put it in the slot at all. But again, so I did top down. Now we just move the bottom over. Left to right. And you can hear it popping every time I'm pulling it in and out. This is another way it's a little bit easier to not have to do that. And then you just keep going. What this is going to do, and I don't know if you can see if I pull this up close enough. Is that going to focus? Not quite. Each strand, these 2 strands are just wrapping around each other. Those 2 strands are just wrapping around each other. And then as you pull it down, those two sets that are wrapped around each other are just going to twist again against each other. So you got two sets that are twisted. Let me see if I can pull this apart. Two sets that are twisted around each other, and then it just twists up like that to create this 4-strand braid. Again, this was super easy. Anyone else craving donuts? Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. And flashback to kids camp. Yes, in fact, there are now people who make Kumihimo with paracord. I'm not quite sure, but yes. Does it knot or tangle underneath when not using the bobbin? A little. That's why I keep combing it out with my fingers. If you're getting threads that are beyond 36 inches long, it will really tangle a lot more. If you have a highly textured yarn, which I don't have any samples of right now, but remember in the book where it was all like really fluffy, and those will catch on each other, especially if you have mohair or something like that, those will catch. But if you have fairly smooth yarn like this, or like the rat tail, or even like the nylon macrame cord, those are not going to tangle. You just kind of need to comb through them, literally. You're just kind of pulling them through your hands to detangle them like this. Anything longer really will start to tangle up pretty badly. So that is the 4-strand braid. Well, one of the 4-strand braids. That's the most simple. It's just a twisted 4-strand braid. Now, color variations. Obviously, you can do a different color in every one of these. They don't have to be the same yarn. They don't even have to be the same width. So I did tell you as a bit of a cheat, I said this was the same yarn, but actually that's not true. I don't know if this is going to focus, but I don't know if you can tell that the dark turquoise is slightly recessed. That's because it's a slightly smaller yarn. I had 2 strands of variegated, 3 strands of variegated and 4 strands of solid turquoise. And the solid turquoise is a little bit smaller, so the other one stands out a little bit more. Also, one of them is acrylic and the other is cotton. It still feels really lovely because the cotton's on the outside. So you can mix and match. A lot of what they'll show you in the pattern books is how to manipulate colors to get things to spiral or to get things to stripe. And it's not necessarily a different pattern, it's just a different placement of the initial yarns and choosing which ones you have. So are there any questions about that so far? Because otherwise I'm going to do something that's going to make you cry. You'll see in a minute as I clear off my table. I'm going to keep looking. Throw out any questions for me if you have them. Any questions? Can you add weird things like metals? Absolutely. You can add beads. It's very, very common to add beads. You will pre-string the beads onto the threads before you start, and then every time you'll pop it up, slide a bead down, and then do whatever your pattern is. So it's very common that when you finish, they'll be completely covered in beads. That's why you'll notice a lot of the companies I recommended had bead in the name, Beadsmith, Beadaholic, Bead Alone, because that's the people who really took off with using Kumihimo in the West, were people who are already making beaded accessories and things like that. Any more questions? Okay, here we go. I'm going to make you cry. Although I had a lot of fun with this, so I'm not going to make me cry. There's a machine, guys. There's a machine. Now, I found out about this machine because I was in Target one day and I saw this package. And you'll see the price on it. Whoops. That's this package. And it says Kumihimo stuff, Kumihimo threads on sale, $5. I was like, that's a really great price. What you can't tell is there's actually the little magnetic clasp in there as well. I was like, okay, that's half price. That's cool. I could just use these pre-wound bobbins. It makes a bunch of bracelets. And then I was like, I was reading the instructions on the back, and it's like, for the Kumi creator. What? Well, I then waited. I'm going to answer the question here from Brenda Darkova. If you use metallic threads, can you find them in the same thickness as other yarns? Absolutely. I tend to go with embroidery floss across the board. You can find metallic embroidery floss, and then I use it like a 6-strand embroidery floss and just use that held together as one. We'll talk more about different types of embroidery thrusts next month when we're talking about sashiko, because it becomes much more important. But yeah, there's this machine that makes Kumihimo. Now, I will say it took me 18 months because originally that was about $30 and I'm cheap. So I waited and I waited and I waited until it went on sale. This is Amazon's idea of a damaged box. I don't know if you can see it, because I sure can't. There's a slight bulge. There's a slight bulge in the top of the box. That was their idea of a damaged box. So I now got this package for $14 instead of $30. Although I think the regular retail price went down to $25. Sorry, you can hear that being thrown on the ground. And here it is. It has changed from being blue to being purple. That's okay. There is an instruction book that is in 14 different languages. I find it highly entertaining because I've never known, Polish and multiple Slavic languages. It does have, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to show you, it only does one pattern. It only does it does an 8-strand braid and it does a 10-strand braid. But they're all pretty much the same pattern. But this does show you different color choices. So this is the same braiding pattern. But if you have, the darks in this position or light ones in this position, you can see, I'm not sure how well you can see that, but these are the exact same braid, just in different colors. Same thing here. This is one of the thicker ones, so you could tell there's more. It creates little diamond patterns in there. So this is a really nice sample of just how you can change up the look. This creates little spiral wraps inside of there. Now let me show you, once you get it set up, and I'm not going to show you the setup because it did take me, maybe 5 minutes, if that, and this is the first time. But yeah, once you get your little bobbins in there, you hold the tension up in there. Now all you do is you crank the handle. Look at that. That's it. It's holding the tension for you. It does stick a little because, hey, it is $15. I don't know if you can see. This is gradually coming out because that's holding the tension and pulling it out there. The problems with this are that you do have to use the refills that they sell. I have not yet tried using the bobbins without refills in them. I'm sorry, with different yarn than what it comes with. Noise of Hungry Hippo. Absolutely. It does kind of catch and stick. You'll notice that all the colors it comes with are Okashicon colors. So that's fantastic. It keeps its tension really nicely. And as you can see, I have made half a bracelet in the minute I've been sitting here cranking. Almost done. How ridiculous is this? So my next project for myself is, now that I've got some of these bobbins empty for the first time, and you can tell that's as far out as it's going to get. Your lines are up, you're done. That's as far as it'll do. You release the kraken. No, you release the tension. Pull this out. There is actually a little mechanism for taping off the tension here, which I'm not going to deal with. And there you go. That was ridiculous. And it's done. Completely done. 8-strand braid, multiple colors, nylon thread. When I want to make, the biggest problem is they call it the 2-in-1 Kumi Creator. What it means is it does bracelet links and it does necklace links, but each bobbin is either for a bracelet length or a necklace length. You can't interchange them. These are the necklace colors. That's all you get. These are the bracelet colors. That's what you get. They're not interchangeable at all. But, if you're like me, you make a lot of glass, a lot of pendants and things. Of course I'm going to use this. For my friends who don't like plastic waste, you're going to hate it because all these little empty bobbins are supposed to be disposed of. I am saying supposed to be. I am going to try refilling them with other things that are a similar yarn weight to this and see if it works. But the tension may not quite you know, hold the tension properly. So it could be, I mean, obviously these kid craft things are usually there to sell the refills. You know, it's a bit like printer ink. They sell you this tool fairly inexpensively, but having to constantly buy the refills is expensive. However, each refill, which, let me pick it up back off the floor. Regular price is $10. It does make 12 bracelets. So even $10 for 12 bracelets, that's not too bad. That's 80 cents a piece. And certainly if you're starting to make up a bunch, and it does, remember, come with the little magnetic clasps on there. So you can see in the photo, if I get the photo in, I'm not sure if you can see how well. There we go. You can see the little magnetic clasp in the photo. So that was fun. Yes, I will make a video of me trying that when I get around to it. I don't know when I'm going to get around to it. Right now, I am trying to grab a piece of washi tape so that I can hold the tension on these ends. Meanwhile, feel free to ask me any more questions, because we're pretty much done with the Kumihimo section for the evening. If you guys have any questions about Kumihimo, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go into a book review and some previews of what are coming up next. No? No questions? And by the way, they do provide you, like I'm using a bit of washi tape here just to hold the tension, and only because they provide you with little washi tape, little stickers to do this with. So I would never have thought to use a little bit of tape to hold the tension on, but that's literally what they give you right here. I was like, why are they giving me a bunch of little stickers with their product name on it? That sounds dumb. They actually have little clamp clasps too, but all of this comes in the refills as well. So you can keep going with it. You have everything that you need in these refills. It's cool, including a tape measure to measure the size of your wrist. Okay, so that was cool. I'm going to switch back to the slides now. I have a few more things to talk to you about. There we go. Okay. So as you can see, I've already picked out the topics for the rest of this year. Next month is going to be Sashiko embroidery, which is very trendy at the moment, especially among quilt guilds and people who like to do upcycling. It's, if you've tried embroidery and you thought this is too complicated for me, I can't remember all the stitches, Sashiko is for you, because there's only one stitch. It's just different ways you use it. I'm also going to talk about Kogen, which is the sister to Sashiko, in just a minute. After that, because you need to know Sashiko to get into Boro and decorative mending is something that the Japanese think Americans are ridiculous to purchase. Boro is a way that fabrics were reused and reused and patched and patched and patched and patched and patched and patched until there's nothing left of the original textile. It's just patches. You know, it's worn for as long as it can, then it's used as a futon cover, then it's used as a cleaning rag, and now Americans buy it for thousands of dollars. Yes, I'm serious. Old pieces of denim that have been patched and patched and patched on top of patched, and we are spending a ridiculous amount of money to buy it, and the Japanese are so embarrassed for us. But you can make your own if you come to the Boro and Decorative Mending class on October 12th. Then on November 9th, I'll show you 2 different techniques for dyeing rice paper, which you can then use to create cards. And then on December 14th, I will show you furoshiki, which is using cloth, which let me pull one out here. I happen to have it handy, using a type of cloth that looks kind of like a handkerchief, but a polyester handkerchief, to wrap up presents. So instead of wrapping paper, you can use reusable cloth instead. So like I said, by the end of the year, you can make some gifts, make some cards, and wrap them, and be ready in time for the winter holidays. Now, I have said in every show, I'm going to give you some television programs that I recommend, some YouTube channels I recommend, and a book of the month. Now, this is a book that has just been released in June. Now, disclaimer, I was given a review copy that will expire, so I currently have access to a copy of this. I do not own the book, but I do definitely have, I've had a couple weeks to look at it, look at the patterns, and try them out. This is Kogen, which is the very close sister to Sashiko. Now, the book itself says that these are Sashiko embroidery projects. That is a slight misnomer. Because the person who wrote this is actually in Tokyo, this boutique Sha is a craft publisher in Tokyo. I believe that something got lost in the English translation because Kogen is technically slightly separate. It's more like a satin stitch. But again, it is all just a straight stitch and all the patterns come in the spacing. So this book, brand new release, it was published this June. Suggested retail price is $19.99, although some places have it for less. Certainly, like if you have a membership at Kinokuniya, they have their membership price listed on the website, so you can get it for $17.99 instead if you're a member. I'll just give you some samples of what the pages look like. They have the Kogen chart, which is just where you put the stitches and what direction you make them. Obviously, you're going to go left to right and then right to left. It's fairly simple. Honestly, if you've tried to do counted cross stitch and that was too complicated, this is easier and I think a little bit more appealing. Maybe that's just my aesthetic. I don't like the slightly pixelated look of counted cross stitch. I mean, it was cool in the 80s when pixels were in, but it's not my thing. Whereas I really enjoy Kogen, and as you'll see, the samples that they have, which are technically top and bottom, I picked ones that were little mini sachets or little Christmas ornaments or little pendants, and you could use them for pin cushions as well. This is what I'm going to suggest that you make in the Sashiko and Boro classes. Make some little sachets, like little lavender sachets or little pin cushions, and then you can give those as gifts. But I really enjoyed this book. It was a fairly simple book, but Kogen is not as popular in the United States. In fact, the only place I've been able to buy Kogen supplies in the US is at Daiso, where they do have small kits. But otherwise, Sashiko has been popular here for about 10 years. Kogen is only getting started here. So this is a great way to hop on the new trend, the new hot trend. But first, you can learn some Sashiko with us next month. My final slide is just my coffee. If you would like to donate to purchase supplies to give me a new webcam so you don't have the autofocus issues, you're welcome to, but you are never required to. Okashicon Presents is always free. You can have a subscription to our Twitch channel and not get the ads. Certainly, if you are an Amazon Prime member, you do get a free Twitch Prime subscription, so you can throw the subscription on our channel and never see the ads. Remember, we do have at least 4 shows every month, and we will probably, continue having other things as much as we can. We're going to see if we can get some additional presenters, or if you guys aren't sick of me, maybe I'll add some additional shows. Let me just pop over for a minute to the list of my topics. I just want to quickly remind you, I did mention that I am on the board of the Austin Oita Sister City Committee. Now, Oita, Japan is our sister city. We were originally scheduled to have a festival on the 22nd of August that has been canceled because of COVID, but we are having a virtual festival, including cooking. Kome is doing an Iron Chef style mystery box with Oita supplies, and we're having a virtual sake tasting with Texas Sake. So please go on Facebook and look for Austin Oita Sister City Committee. And remember, next month, second Monday of the month, be back for Sashiko. I will have a supply list. Again, this will be the supplies that you can find inexpensively around your house rather than the official Japanese imports, but you can get a very similar effect and you don't need to buy extra stuff. Thank you guys for being with us. It is 9 o'clock. It's about time to wrap up. Feel free to continue to ask questions in the chat. I am here. If you guys have any questions, you can always contact Okashicon, contact me. But thank you so much for spending your Monday night with us. I really appreciate you. And we welcome your feedback. Thanks again. Have a good night. And